DC Comics has a brand new general manager in the form of Daniel Cherry III. He is coming to us by way of Activision, and there's a lot being said about him, his background. I wanted to kind of give you some context to the position and the person, at least what we know. Now, granted, I'm speculating on some of this, but this is one of those cases where there's a lot of history that we can look at. There's a lot of online material to kind of get a sense of his personality, what he drives, and it provides an interesting profile of the person we're going to get. So let's step through that. Hey everybody, this is Perch. As DC Comics continues its restructuring, and I think it's important to look at the changes to DC Comics all the way back to Dan Didio's removal early in the year. I think you need to start there because that was really the first moment where at the leadership level, we saw Jim Lee kind of, owning kind of both sides of the business. And then this quest to fill a role at that position. We knew that with the acquisition being settled and Warner Media coming in and making further changes to staffing, that there were going to be changes. And of course, those all kind of came down less than a month ago with a wide series of layoffs across Warner Media, which also hit DC. You saw longtime editor-in-chief Bob Harris, Bobby Chase, several other kind of senior people at that level removed from the company. And now we finally have this hire that had been teased for a while. And I want to say on the offset that it feels like people are leading with the wrong headline in a lot of cases. Before Daniel Cherry was named, the kind of the word from DC, mind you, was that they were looking at somebody from esports. Now, clearly they already had Daniel Cherry in mind, and he comes from that world, sort of. Again, we're going to get to that in a second. But I think a lot of people believe that DC or Warner Media was out kind of looking at a bunch of people in esports positions. That wasn't what they were doing. They were looking for a particular type of individual who, at this case, happened to work in esports. There's a subtle difference there, but it's an important one as we try and chart what's going to happen going forward with DC. So Daniel Cherry, if you look into his background, he's got kind of an interesting mix. He was certainly in Activision in esports, as we mentioned, for about 2.5 years, but larger in his career shows two things really prominent for, a decade or more. And that's one, a lot of involvement with marketing. He is a classic chief marketing officer, CMO, kind of digital innovator type person. That DNA, and we'll talk about what that means here in a minute, but he is through and through a marketing person. He is all about marketing, and in many cases, as is true with a lot of sports, what I would call aggressive marketing. And what I mean by that is proactive marketing is a good way to put it. There's industry terms for all this. I'm trying to kind of convey this in layman's terms. It means that you're not going to sit back and just kind of make decisions on font color and that kind of stuff. That's a design department and a different kind of marketing. This isn't somebody who's going to be kind of passively looking at advertisements. This is somebody whose job it is to go out and market this brand as the biggest, the best, powerful, strong. They're about perception of a company as much as the actual units being sold. This is a heavily core marketing job. The other side to his world is people keep getting hung up in esports. I have no idea why. Maybe it's because Heather Antos had a brief kind of overnight stay at an esports company before returning to Valiant. I don't know. But esports is somewhat irrelevant. What isn't is sports. He comes from a world of sports through hockey, through a bunch of pieces in his background. He's very much rooted in sports marketing. And sports marketing has a certain tone and flavor to it. It is about building up the brand. It's about building recognition. It's about building fan engagement. It's about building a tight attach rate of units to product. And it's very, not to use a cliche, it's a very in-your-face, very active world of marketing. It's some have called it guerrilla marketing. I don't think that term is particularly accurate, but it's where you are taking this brand and your goal is to make this brand dominant, where you're omnipresent in the region or the market that you're playing in. Now, why is all that important? Well, a couple of reasons. One, if you've been listening to this channel for a while, one of the things that's always struck me, and I've said the same thing over on Thinking Critical when I've been on that show, is that DC is a confusing mess at times with their marketing. And that's not to knock the people who've had the job before, or maybe it is a little, but it has been true that DC at times has put their best foot forward. They have tried to do a lot of the right things. They have tried to actively manage their business. They've tried to be proactive and not reactive around decisions they made around distribution and around kind of comics and partnerships and everything else. They've tried to put themselves in the driver's seat, but more often than not, where they stumble is around marketing. And I think it's cost them a lot of dollars in the past. It's been a nice thing that books like what Scott Snyder did with Batman originally, what Sean Gordon Murphy did with White Knight, these have been pleasant surprises for DC. But at a corporate level, if you look at something like White Knight, you should be thinking to yourself, again, at the corporate level, why were we surprised that this was a hit? They shouldn't have been. It's certainly not the level they were. You've got an artist who's got a decent name, decent following. He crafted a story, and so you can argue they probably left money on the table by not maximizing that brand quicker or faster. And in addition, you look at things like their move away from Diamond. They let that story, everything from the whole 5G debacle and what was going on there, to the various celebrities and other people coming in to write comics for them, to how Tom King's run ended early, and then there was going to get Batman, Catwoman, and then not, and then maybe it's coming later, to kind of Bendis's arrival of being put on all these books and then shrinking back from all those books. They have let the news largely be carried by folks like Bleeding Cool, Rich Johnston, CBR, Newsarama. They're the ones who are pretty much dictating the news story and the marketing of DC. It's not happening from the company. They're kind of rolling out decisions, and they're doing a poor job in a lot of cases of really owning the news. They're letting other people do it for them. And I think that's been a criticism I've had for DC for quite some time. And so you get these articles written, like these lunatic articles written by comic shop owners that call them sociopaths, and you get Rich Johnson defining this layoff as a bloodbath, and just all this kind of stuff that's really bad PR and bad marketing, and it hides some of their accomplishments beneath a lot of bad noise, and that's a huge flaw on them. Well, bringing it back to Daniel Cherry, if you look at his background and what he does, you feel very confident that it's not going to operate that way in the future. It's going to be a lot more controlled, a lot more contained, and the message is going to get coordinated. Now, you could argue DC really didn't have this role before, so maybe it's understandable some of this was going on. But I see if there's one thing I can predict out of DC as an entity over the next 2-3 years, I think you're going to see a dramatic change from how the message gets out to something a lot more controlled by the company and a lot more strategic. And that's positive. That's good news if they can pull that off. It's bad news for news sites. Just bluntly, I think, and also, and this is a prediction. I will get to kind of the other half of this later. I think that for people who have operated this business, meaning within Disney or within DC, as a mom and pop kind of culture, I think those people are probably in for a bit of a rude awakening, not just with Cherry, but with all these changes that have been coming up. There's going to be a lot more accountability. There's going to be status reports. There's going to be meetings. It's going to be a lot more buttoned down than it's been in the past. I think hires are going to be a little bit more scrutinized. I think that your ability to kind of just go and invent and create and do things on your own is going to be clamped down a little bit. I think there's going to be more control because I think there's going to be a definite effort to coordinate things. They brought in somebody who is strong and aggressive, and how that fits within comics is going to be fascinating to see. I know. I think the other interesting part is if you go to cons and you've gone for any length of time, there's one truth that kind of comes out, and that's that Marvel tends to own the. They tend to own the, like, we're the biggest kid in the room. They have always put on that. I'm hesitant to use the word ego, but that probably is the right word, where they are the ones in charge. They're the big guys in the room. They're the ones who you got to pay attention to. And if everything in Cherry's background suggests he's not going to be content having DC kind of be the second guy in the room. And if that means he has to be a little meaner, a little more aggressive, a little bit more business focused, a little bit more dominant, I think he's going to do it. And I think that could be a pretty nasty shock for people both in DC and Marvel as that profile gets elevated. Now, in terms of what this means for comics, I think, and I said this on Wes's show as well, the reality is I think DC as a company has often prioritized the direct market over other things that arguably made them more money, like some of their licensing efforts. And I think it's clear to me that the direct market is going to get deprioritized. But let me be clear. They were probably higher in terms of just sheer revenue. I'm not talking as a comics fan now. I'm talking as somebody who is, as a business person. The effort and attention that they would put to the direct market and to the comics line, in particular with the direct market, was higher than the efforts they were putting into other areas that were probably making them more money. And I think in the near future, that balances out, which means the direct market, the comic market, will get less attention, but probably attention that is appropriate to the amount of money it's bringing in. Now, this can be it's going to depend on who you are. If you're a comic shop owner, if you're a collector, if you're somebody who's in the direct market, this is all probably bad news. If you're looking at the long-term stability of the business or you're a shareholder, this is probably not necessarily good news, but appropriate news that makes solid business sense. I think you're going to see DC try and play a lot more horizontally. And what I mean by that is you're going to see them playing in games and in licensing and in digital and, yes, in print comics and graphic novels, but they're going to try and go much wider to make that brand a lot more dominant and pervasive across a number of different mediums. I think they're going to do less for comic shops, and they're going to not want to play in a space where, you have maybe, just you got to think about this. If you're running $1 billion business, which is not what DC, but if you're running $1 billion total licensing opportunity, which it probably does start to get there, it definitely gets there. Then why are you listening to, say, comic shop owner X that's out of, Akron, Ohio, who's complaining about, some poster you put into a box? You're not going to listen to those people. You're not going to go on Bleeding Cool and listen to kind of the Wednesday Warrior comic shop owners who are complaining that, this title includes a tie-in you don't like. That's going to become white noise to you. And so that's inevitable. I don't think, again, that's not necessarily good news, but if you work for DC, if you're a comic creator, you're interested in making money, you're interested in taking your brand and going bigger, you're interested in running a franchise, this is probably either not going to affect you or maybe affect you positively. If you were propped up by a system that was failing, this is going to be bad news, meaning I think things that were done maybe out of nicety or out of history are going to start to just be dropped. And I think that's a change that we're getting in comics. I think some people ask, well, what's happening to Jim Lee? Jim Lee is taking on expanded responsibilities of the overall DC brand, which is a fancy way of saying he will be an evangelist. He's going to go and try and be the Stan Lee of the DC brand, to go and be out there. His face is going to be seen a lot more, and he's going to be more of a cheerleader for DC. And that's maybe the appropriate role for him now, and where he can add the most value. I think for editors and comics, you're going to see comics treated like a portfolio brand. I think, again, there's a handful of people at DC, creators, who are probably going to do really, really well. and there's a handful of creators who are used to kind of playing the politics and kind of living as big fish in a small pond that will not. I think if you can't come in and prove that if given the right tools, you can get a book over 100,000 copies, you're probably not necessarily in trouble, but you're not going to have a free ride. That's going to end for some people. The other thing it's worth saying, because it's what other videos said, and we talked about it on Wes's show as well, is people are pointing out that on Danny Cherry's LinkedIn page, he's got a Black Lives Matter logo and a rainbow flag there, kind of attached to the movement. And that's getting a lot of attention, and a lot of people are making the comment, "Oh, great, it's a SJW hire that's going to bring all those politics and ruin the company, everything else." And I say, hold on. Again, this isn't no, it will be better than you think or worse than you think. Just look into more of the personality of the man. That's not what we're getting here. You're getting something else. You look into his history. He has a long history of supporting social programs, being on the board of companies around social equality and other pieces. He is not an activist like you probably have seen on, if you're looking at Fox News and you're seeing the Chaz in Seattle or those kinds of things. He wouldn't be hanging out in the Chaz. I'll just put it that way. It's a different personality type. It's not the kind of person who's going to blow up a business and make no money in favor of social. This is not somebody who doesn't care about profits. Look at his background and look what he's accomplished. He definitely cares about building business, making money. He's a very eloquent speaker. What I mean by that is if you look at some of his speeches and some of the things he's done, he's a dynamic speaker. He's a kind of a go-get-em kind of speaker, very much a classic marketing personality. And he's got a dominant presence to him. It is not the person who's going to come in and say, let's deal with all let's change all the characters. I put it this way. This is my prediction. You're not going to see him come in and want to replace all the DC characters with, diverse, random people with no brand recognition. Everything in his background suggests he would have hated the entire premise that was laid out with the 5G initiative. He's going to be about how do we take Superman and quadruple the money. And I mentioned this on the other show, and I'll mention it here too, which I know will blow people's heads up. His history, his resume, what he's done in places. And for those people pointing to Activision as being a woke game company or anything else, again, he's Activision esports fan engagement, different thing, very different from the games that are being produced. He had nothing to do with that part of the business. I know this is going to make people crazy, but a lot of his focus on business and hammer business aggressively is a lot more like Jim Shooter in the 80s. Now, the personality-wise, I'm sure the two are nothing alike. But for people who have been saying we need Jim Shooter to come back, who's going to, bring the hammer down and focus on business and focus on maximizing the money and everything else, I suspect that a lot of what Cherry will do will feel a lot more like what people have been asking for in that regard. Again, personality completely different, but that's, look at his resume, look at what he's delivered. That fits a lot more of the personality type. Now, will it be good? Will it be bad? We'll have to play it out. But that's just a little bit about the guy running DC. If you ask me my personal opinion, I would say this. DC needed a strong marketer. They needed somebody who's going to have a firmer hand on that and really drive the business and not let it just kind of drift around and let other people drive it for them. They needed that. So parts of this guy's personality type fit. As I said on the other show, I would never put anything tied to politics, whether it's Black Lives Matter or Make America Great Again or the Confederate flag or any of that stuff in my LinkedIn profile. I wouldn't do it. LinkedIn is for business. It's should be aimed for things that are not going to it's not about that. Unfortunately, these movements they go in directions that you don't control. So tying your brand to things you don't control is risky, but it's his deal. It's his resume. He can do whatever he wants with it. I think people should I think there's a lot to read into his background further down the page. And so if you're going to look into the guy, don't stop at the banner. Keep scrolling down and learn a little bit about the individual and make some predictions of your own of where it's going to go. The banner is I would just say a bit of a red herring. A lot of people are going to go there and stay there, and I think there's more. And hear me correctly. I'm not saying, oh, everything is perfect, everything is great, or the world is coming undone. This is an interesting curveball to the personalities of comics. I think a lot of the people in DC, or if he was applied to Marvel, the personality fit is it's going to be interesting to see how it all goes down. Anyway, what do you think? Good move, bad move? Was this helpful? I'm just giving a little context to the person. Obviously, go do your own research, make your own opinions, but hopefully this was of some assistance. Ask me any questions you want in the comments below, and we'll learn about this guy. And for what it's worth, as somebody who wants comics to grow and succeed, I wish him well. I hope everybody coming in is primed for success. I want the success for you, so I'm rooting for you, man. I'm rooting for you, Daniel, and anybody who comes into the role. I want success. That's my goal. Anyway, subscribe. If you haven't subscribed yet, please consider. I would appreciate it. Follow me on social media. Send me an email at comicsperch@gmail.com. And thanks for listening.